In an episode in June, we had analysed China's chokehold on rare earth magnet exports and what it could mean for India's electric vehicle industry.
If we do not receive fresh supplies, then there could be challenges, with respect to production.
This is not an India-specific problem. This is China retaliating against the US tariffs and the US ban on export of semiconductors to China.
Efforts are being made to secure overseas resources through engagements with the mineral-rich countries such as Australia, Argentina, Chile, etc.
Before that, in May, we had asked whether close trade ties between the two countries were possible. The answer was no, maybe, but no.
Definitely, India is not going to be part of a China-led tech world order.
I will not rush to come to any positive conclusion at this point of time. I will not really be very optimistic. Putting more substance in economic engagement will require, frankly, a change of heart on part of China.
But now, that change of heart seems to have happened.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi has welcomed improving ties with China, attributing the progress to a shared respect for each other's interests.
The Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has met Prime Minister Narendra Modi in New Delhi today. Wang Yi is visiting India for the first time in 3 years.
So are Trump's tariffs pushing the two Asian giants closer together?
It's not a full-blown reset yet, more like a tactical realignment. Both sides are issuing tourist visas again, direct flights are set to resume, export and investment curbs are being eased. And later this month, Prime Minister Modi will be in China. This will be his first trip to the country in 7 years.
And here's the most interesting bit. India and China are preparing a narrowly scoped trade package: rare earth magnets, fertilizers, and pharmaceuticals. Of course, it's dovetailed to the much-anticipated Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Tianjin, which is to be held on August 31st and September 1st. That marks, as you just heard, Narendra Modi's first China visit in 7 years. Now, this trade pact, if it happens, would reverse Beijing's export controls and signal a partial thaw in trade relations between India and China. So, the outreach has sort of started, but India-bound magnet supplies have not yet resumed. This, even as China has agreed to resume shipments to several other countries, including the US. Okay, context. Now, rare earths are a family of 17 metals whose unusual magnetic, luminescent, and electrochemical properties make them indispensable to modern electronics. In India's case, electric vehicles. In EVs, neodymium, praseodymium, dysprosium, terbium-based permanent magnets are the workhorse for compact and efficient motors and systems. And of course, China controls 60% of mining and 90% of refining of these metals. Also, on April 4th, Beijing had paused the exports of urea and several other grades of fertilizers into India. That too is being eased, but that easing is limited to just urea. Shipments of specialty fertilizers such as calcium nitrate and monoammonium phosphate remain the unresolved piece. And that's a critical piece too, because India relies on China for about 80% of these inputs. The third piece of the reported trade talks is pharma. Both sides are reportedly drawing out a plan to work together on innovation in this industry. Remember, these are two sides that have always competed in this field. Also, where medicine innovation is concerned, China has long stolen a march on India, which remains more or less stuck in generic drugs. Why talk of cooperation then? Well, to mitigate a looming imbalance in the global pharma industry, primarily due to the 250% tariffs that the US has warned it will impose soon on all finished drugs that it imports. Meanwhile, remember, Washington has deferred new China tariffs by 90 days. This is a moving backdrop both capitals are trying to navigate. So, in this episode, we try to answer the following questions. How badly have the automotive and agriculture sectors been impacted since April 4th? How big a win is the current thaw? How plausible is a cooperation on pharma between India and China? How realistic is the assertion that China as a trading partner can offset a tariff trigger-happy US? And going by previous volte-faces by our northern neighbor, how risk-laden are these growing ties? We try to answer all this and much more in today's episode. It's Thursday, the 21st of August. I'm Anirban Chowdhury. This is the Morning Brief. First up, my colleagues Sharmistha Mukherjee, Shambhavi Anand and Vikas Dandekar, ET's in-house experts on auto, agriculture and pharma, who broke the story of an Indo-China trade pact in the works. Sharmistha, Shambhavi, Vikas, very warm welcome to the Morning Brief.
Hi Anirban.
Hi Anirban.
Thank you so much, Anirban. Always good to be here.
So let's start with what has been the impact of China's export chokehold on your respective sectors in the last few months. Sharmistha, if you could start with auto, especially EVs.
So Anirban, it was a big problem, and if it hadn't got resolved right now, we would have begun to see the repercussions across companies in the sector, especially companies who are into manufacturing electric vehicles. They had been seriously affected. A couple of weeks back, Rajiv Bajaj had also said that for the Chetak scooters, which is an electric vehicle that Bajaj is producing, they were looking at a month of almost zero production in August. TVS, which is again a big player in the electric two-wheeler segment, they had been raising alarms over the situation. Ather Energy, also industry sources tell us, is affected. Automakers whose portfolio is skewed more towards electric vehicles like TVS and Bajaj, who are producing a substantial number of electric scooters, they have been affected more than a company like, say, Maruti Suzuki, which doesn't have an EV right now. But even then, they had pushed back the launch of their first electric SUV, the e-Vitara, by a couple of months, and they have made changes in the production schedule. Overall, it was hurting everybody who was to get into EVs because the rare earth magnets, while they're required in anything which has an electric circuit, but they are absolutely mandatory in making electric vehicles.
Now, Shambhavi, coming to you, the export holdup in fertilizers also has had a pretty significant impact on your sector, which is agriculture. What has that been like?
So it became pretty serious because the chokehold did impact the Kharif season, which is the primary sowing season for India. We have seen in the last 2 years, pulses inflation has had a serious impact on food inflation and overall inflation. Oil seeds are very important. So it did affect. So let me take a step back and explain it to you a little bit. There were two kinds of fertilizers that were stopped. First, there are the subsidized fertilizers, which are urea and DAP. These are the ones which farmers use in large quantities across major crops for wheat and pulses and oilseed also. Then we have got specialty fertilizers like calcium nitrate and MAP. These aren't subsidized and they're used in much smaller quantities, mostly for horticulture, which is vegetables and fruit. But here is the key point. Horticulture alone contributes 34% of our gross value added, GVA, which is a very important measure in agriculture. So even a small shift here really matters. Now, while India does manufacture urea and DAP, we still heavily depend on raw materials, especially for DAP. And a big chunk of those imports come from China. So the manufacturing of DAP, which is the second most used fertilizer in India, got impacted.
And now there's been a sort of let up in exports. In fact, one of our stories said that some shipments of rare earth magnets have already started to come. Sharmistha, what is the auto industry telling you?
So, Anirban, we have some 36 applications pending with China's Ministry of Commerce. And so far, what we had been hearing is that while China had started easing supplies to companies in United States, Europe, and also a few in Southeast Asia, India was being singled out when it came to supply of rare earth magnets. And over the last 1 month or so, a lot of conversations were happening in the government between the Ministry of External Affairs in India and their Chinese counterparts. And what we understand is that China has now said they will ease supplies. But what my sources in the component sector tell me that formal licenses have not come in yet. But because the Chinese foreign ministry is here on a 2 day visit, and yesterday there seems to have been a breakthrough, people are optimistic that they will get the formal clearances soon and supplies will resume.
Shambhavi, similar relief for fertilizers. What are stakeholders saying? How big a win is this?
See, the reports say that some amount of phosphatic raw material and urea is expected. So the key food grains, pulses, which will be sown in the Rabi season, which is the winter sowing season, we are at least happy there because DAP and urea are used for major crops like food grains and pulses and all. But for specialty fertilizers, the companies themselves, companies which manufacture these fertilizers, have started looking at other countries for import. Now, the thing is that companies who manufacture specialty fertilizers, they have started looking for alternate destinations like Jordan and Russia and European countries. But this will take some time to get them here because of the disturbances in West Asian region. The shipping route will change. Secondly, we will not get them at the same price as from China. It will be at a higher cost. So right now, companies say that it is 25 to 30% higher, but it could go up further. So this higher cost, the farmer will have to bear because these are not subsidized ones. The government doesn't give subsidy for them. So, but the good thing is that hopefully for the winter season, we will have some in pipeline or stock or some shipments coming in.
Vikas, coming to you now. How significant is having pharma as one of the pillars of an Indo-China trade pact?
So, given the situation that is arising from US tariffs, I think a lot of dynamic situation is changing. Basically, if you really look at three important countries in the supply chain, China supplies almost 70%, 65-70% of key starting materials and APIs to India. India supplies almost 40-42% of finished formulations to US. The finished formulations that go to the US for generic drugs actually get the source of those raw materials from China. So it is so deeply and intricately connected to each other that tomorrow, if China really wants to block raw materials and key starting materials for the Indian players, there will be a huge crisis and there will be a massive supply chain disruption. Now, given that situation of the frequent concerns that are coming from the US tariff situation, it is very important for the two countries to see how they can work together. China itself has become a huge market for Indian companies. So I can say Mankind, Dr. Reddy's, Glenmark, Lupin, Zydus Life Sciences, all of these companies have done some or the other deals with Chinese companies on the innovation side. On the other side, you have this huge dependence on China for about 70% of raw materials. So that makes it a very important, combine where India can actually gain a lot from the Chinese innovation side, while India can also explore the potential of the Chinese market. So, increasingly it has become very difficult to work in the US atmosphere. If this kind of a coercion is being used by the US that if you don't set up a manufacturing site in US, then we will keep coming back to you on higher tariffs. That kind of becomes very difficult to digest. More so because it's very clearly known that if you are getting supplies of more than 40-45% of your generics in the US from the Indian companies, then obviously if you are killing those prospects, who suffers? The US healthcare system actually suffers. And there have been a lot of data of how over $200 billion was saved alone in 2022 by supplies of Indian generics. So on one side, it becomes very uncertain for Indian companies so far as the US market is concerned. On the other side, you have this big prospect opening where China can actually have a far more better potential than going to the US.
Can one really offset the other?
No, no. So you're right, actually. It is not possible that you completely abandon the US market. The whole triangle is so deeply interconnected that the dependence on each other is huge. See, if you really ask me, China really doesn't require any imports coming from India. In the last decade or so, they have really leapfrogged the game from being just API and raw material suppliers to being a new axis of innovation globally, to the extent that even US and European companies are massively in licensing products that have actually been discovered in Chinese labs. So the game is really changing very fast. If you really ask me, the threat for US and European biotech, that is actually coming from the Chinese. I mean, if they have been able to make this change in the last 10 years, I think, the grip is going to get tighter and tighter in the coming few years. Today's article in Economic Times, written by Ms. Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw of Biocon, says how China has actually changed the game of innovation and how we can be able to catch up, provided we do some of those reforms of regulatory setup, kind of giving clearances to trials, encouraging investments, and so on. The new China is all about pharma innovation. And sooner India emulates that great example, the better.
Got it. Is there any clarity, and just dipping into your reportage, do we have more details on what could be discussed in the trade package with regards to pharma?
So some of the things that I have heard is that, yes, there is a very clear thinking on how India can work closely with China. But, the field is so wide open that it can move in any direction. So the only thing is that so far, India and China have been seen as major competitors. In APIs, they have been having major fights. In certain situations, there have always been an alarm that if there is a Indian manufacturer which is making a API, the Chinese drop the prices. And then the Indian companies really have no option but to close the unit. And that has been the way it has worked in the last 20-25 years. So to find a middle path and to see exactly what could be the drivers to a close alignment is going to be very interesting. But yes, they have started talking at least.
Sharmistha, Shambhavi, Vikas, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Anirban.
Thank you, Anirban.
Thank you so much.
Now, to understand how feasible a trade relation between India and China can be, its advantages, risks, and challenges, especially with the US as part of the triangle, I spoke to Sachin Chaturvedi, an economist and policy researcher and vice chancellor at Nalanda University. I asked him what led to the change of tack between the two countries.
See, if you look at what moved this, I would say the geopolitics. And as I said earlier, US, China, India, China, both are factors in terms of bringing India and China together. This is important for China, that India is part of the larger rubric that BRICS is trying to bring in. It is also of now interest for India not to just confine its trade with US alone or choose US over China. So that kind of idea of keeping national interest first is something that government has now moved forward. And beyond the border dispute, for which the foreign minister was already here, has shown willingness, sensitivity, and respect for India and the position that we have taken. And this is something which was due for long. As you may recall, even in earlier part of this century itself, we had very good rapport with China on trade relations, though trade deficit expanded. But even during Prime Minister's first tenure, when Xi Jinping came, the issue was discussed in terms of how trade deficit should be addressed. At this point, you find that India imports 3,915 products at 6-digit HS code, and we find that out of that, 327 products constitute more than 70%. So this part is being addressed by India, for which investment and many other dimensions may come up. And this is also bringing in discussions on critical products like fertilizers and the rare earth elements, etc.
So, what should India put on the table to avoid another trade squeeze like April 4th?
So, I would suggest that India has to look certainly for like titanium. We need to have concentrates of it. The cerium compounds that are important, compounds of inorganic and organic nature, including cerium, of course, but then rare earth metals, yttrium, scandium, and the mixture of these metals. So they are important for us, and topmost would be fertilizer. So what we were importing from Morocco, which was bringing in from China, China blocked Morocco to block India. Now, this kind of game would have to be spelled out openly on the table. And this would help in terms of generating fast-track approvals, clearing licenses, consignments, and bringing dimensions together.
So, what would be a realistic and beneficial agreement for both countries on rare earths?
See, at this point, if you see the factual details, in 2022, we were importing something like $170 million worth of rare earth magnets from China, which they blocked.
Right.
And if you see within 2 years, so basically 23 and 24, in these 2 years, the value has gone up to almost $338 million. This also shows that our dependence on China has multiplied. And this is something which is important in terms of how rare earth metals are provided by them and not disrupted. China has largely agreed with whatever initial reports are coming in. And I presume that rare earth magnets, which have now been eased off, would not be disrupted again. This is equally important for our fertilizers. So these two sectors, I feel, are extremely important.
But is it plausible at all to have China as a trading partner as an offset to the US? For that matter, is the US plus one thought realistic at all?
Kind of geopolitics that we have ended up with, there is no point on getting dependent on any market. And that's where our wide base through the new set of FTAs with partner countries, I think is going to have a huge importance. Let us not be under any illusion that tomorrow US would not bring down the tariffs, would not go ahead with pressing of the tariffs, may have some other optics coming up under Quad, and the kind of gambling that we are seeing between the US and Russia, that would not have its own dividends. So I think a very fair, very open, very transparent trade partnership with the multiple actors, I think, is the need of the hour. The government's strategy to open up FTA discussions with almost 22 partners, I think, is a great opportunity for us to connect in Africa and with Latin American countries. Similar efforts to revisit the FTAs with our earliest partners like Singapore or South Korea, Japan, and ASEAN, they are the ones where we need to bring in energy.
But are we really telling ourselves that any of these regions, Latin America, Africa, can be an offset to what we have with the US or the kind of influence that US has on our trade as a customer?
Yeah, certainly, because there are several product supplies which are now coming from these countries to us, like, for instance, our partnership with Bolivia, with Argentina, with Peru. And now they have intensified with Chile. So you are finding that new markets are coming up and new opportunities are knocking our door. They are also very keen to supply. What we have done at RIS is to see that these 327 products that I referred to, out of them, 5 products are of steel industry. If you remove them, then 323 products constitute something like 72%. And these 323 products, each one has more than 17 suppliers. Half of them are from these regions. So we need to focus on where our imports are coming in. In fact, I say that we need not focus exclusively on exports. We should also see where imports are coming from. And what is it that China is doing to facilitate access to their imports? And we find that 3 factors are important. Access to finance, so the importers get access to finance immediately. Second, orders are delivered with the shortest possible time. Third, the way language barrier has been overcome by Chinese and businesses pulling is something that we need to develop, invest in, and make Latin American countries, which are also producing same goods with same quality, with some enhanced cost for transportation, etc. That part we need to minimize, but then trade opportunities would be huge, and we would be diversifying our market. During COVID, we single-mindedly focused on API. Our dependence was 92%. We could bring it down to 67%. In some of the API, it has even gone down to 58%. So you find that in certain APIs, it is at one level, and some others, it is at another level. So that's also a heterogeneous group. API is not just one homogeneous entity. So that way, new opportunities and new strategic thinking would be needed. And that's where very often I say that trade, investment, finance, and then our ability to bring in technology would all have to be brought in. And that's what is going to contribute.
Can we really trust China?
That's what I'm saying, that we don't have to. We have to create our options, and we have to create our opportunities for greater convergence with demand and supply imbalances we are ending up with. China has also come forward because they also need us, not just for trading purposes, but for the larger geopolitical trouble they are in. And this is the opportunity for us without compromising vital national interests.
Mr. Chaturvedi, thank you so much for joining us on the Morning Brief, sir.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
So, we have to judge the change or the thaw in the relationship between India and China by proof, not promises. What proof? A magnet export license actually issued to an Indian buyer, a urea cargo on the water, and a formal India-China pharma pact. India's playbook should be clear. Lock minimum volumes, fast-track licenses, but also have clear exit routes for any future chokes. That's short term. In the medium term, diversify trading partnerships and markets, and in the long term, work on building capacities for rare earths and API. That's it for today. This episode was produced by me and Vinay Joshi, sound designed by Rajas Naik. The Morning Brief drops every Tuesday, Thursday and Friday, wherever you get your podcasts. Also listen to Corner Office Conversation, our brand new fortnightly show where we interview the most interesting business leaders in India and the world, every alternate Monday on your favorite listening platform. Have a good rest of the week. All external clips you heard in this episode belong to their respective owners. Credits are mentioned in the description.